you have found Looking Glass Forum, and we are here to declare our independence, to unlearn the insidious propaganda narrative flooding the media with mass hysteria, racial invective, and hopelessness. But we know the lies are many, and the truth is one. So we're back today, and we have a very interesting guest today, a very controversial fellow indeed, and in the person, author, pastor, and teacher, among other things, of Eric Jon Phelps. And I've been following his work for some time, as have many others. It's not surprising if you've never heard of him, but I think that his ideas and some of his interesting additions and clarifications on the historical record are something that we all need to pay attention to. It's true that Eric Jon Phelps has some very radical ideas, and he's dealt with different things that other people won't really discuss or get into, and he's had some very difficult postulations, to say the least, that he's put forth. But I think that the interview at this time is crucial, because it turns out that a lot of the things that he'd been saying for a long time that appeared to be incredibly implausible years ago, today is jumping off the headlines. So though I can't agree with a lot of what Eric Jon Phelps teaches, there are many very interesting facts that I think are going to come out. Now, history itself is controversial in the extreme, and we must look back after decades to discover that the worst nightmares we had never prepared ourselves to accept may very well turn out to be true, and often this is the case. Many times the layers of deceptive propaganda that reassure the populace that there is nothing to worry about, the active lies of the media as inexhaustible puppets that sound out the brainwash that the leftist media overlords demand universal corporatist orthodoxy to the party. So we must ask ourselves, how did we arrive with this new rabble of neo-fascists, looters, and rioters, a new violent communist movement of absolute statists who intend to use the power of the state to bend and enforce the public attitude and behaviors rather than institute the policies that the public is choosing to elect through its officials? In the background looms the coming currency collapse, and as our dollar begins to devalue, our ability as a nation to grow and enrich a productive working class begins to disintegrate. These forces that are instigating social unrest, the burn, loot, murder crowd, and the Antifa, Black Bloc, revolutionary abolitionist movement, which rallies the college campus agitators, will be bought and funded very cheaply, as the climbing fuel and food prices and stagnant working wages will bring the large sector of paycheck to paycheck earning class blue-collar workers into the stranglehold between rising prices and a currency racing toward hyperinflation. If we are to be liberated from the toxic seduction of the mainstream media propaganda, which batters us with unceasing malice between Party A diametrically opposed to Party B, and as we clutch our most determined causes and personal political issues, and we lean ever more energetically into these adversarial politics, we are rushing headlong into the crucible of internecine social conflict and civil war. We cannot engage our intellect over our emotions, and this false dichotomy that's presented to us, which leads America into a self-destruction, is to be found naturally and quietly being funded and coordinated by the aristocracy of Europe and those same elite banking cabals. And we can see that the world aligns itself against America as mobs carry away TVs and rich, corrupted college kids burn buildings. Our enemies prepare military maneuvers which will lead to a military invasion. It's so unthinkable in today's population of people being polled about presidential politics constantly. It's unthinkable that we were facing a military invasion. And this could potentially lead millions of Americans to concentration camps and back into the chains of slavery. So we have to ask ourselves again, what is tyranny? What is slavery? History has its immutable ways of stripping back the layers of comforting lies and soft padded propaganda in order to allow researchers like tomb raiders to finally break through the curse's seal and to cast a light to finally behold the horrific truth. And after a facade of lies decades later finally falls away, then and only then can the whole edifice of society and civilization finally react to that truth that has been covered up. And the truth of these atrocities are often lied to systematically, the way the New York Times covered up the Holocaust, the way that Walter Duranty covered up the butchery and the forced starvation of millions of Ukrainians as they were forcefully exterminated and starved and their food stolen. Walter Duranty and his lies hid that atrocity for decades. They even have a Walter Duranty journalism award these idiots can shamefully accept. And it's the same way millions of Yugoslavians were killed by Aloysius Victor Stepanak, a bishop, and the dictator who rose up, who destroyed Yugoslavia and as it formed Croatia Croatia, as the state of Croatia as it is today, Ante Pavlic, and they together, Pavlic and Stepanak, collapsed Yugoslavia into a state of chaos and mass murder, where millions of ethnic Yugoslavians who were Jews or they were simply not Catholic were butchered by the million. Millions killed in the streets, beaten with hammers, raped to death, beheaded with saws. All the pictures are on the internet, but you know nothing of it. Why is that the case? As we approach the precipice of large-scale racial provocations, we can see that the internationalist agenda, which has worked to secrete radicals from African and Arab nations all over Europe, European nations, and into North America, which are predominantly European white societies, consequently large populations of radical Muslims in London, Somalian Muslim immigrants in Michigan, are examples of how the international elite have been working on overtime to set into motion a social destabilization on a worldwide scale. While we're dealing with these superimposed, simulated, and bought and paid for radical groups, the Black Lives Matter, the racially specific revolution that's taking place, we have to understand that this is really mirroring what's happening in South Africa, where the ANC, a 100% black political party, has taken over the South African government and is running the white citizens in South Africa into the ground. Murders and rapes of white South Africans are not being investigated. Their land is being taken wholesale. So you can see that while this racial dialectic is being injected into the body politic here in America, that other places in Britain, in South Africa, are dealing with the same racial agitation and political provocation. It's determined to set black and white citizens against each other. All right, so we're going to just go ahead and start our interview with Eric Jon Phelps. So, we're here today with Eric Jon Phelps, and a well-known author and pastor. And I just wanted to say, how are you doing today, sir?
Pleasure to be with you, John, and your listeners.
Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate your time. It's wonderful to get to spend some time with you today. And we've been talking on the podcast a lot about the Illuminati. And there's a lot of alternate facts. There's a lot of different things that are being said about the Illuminati. But the occult history of the Illuminati comes into being at a time just when Pope Clement XIII was poisoned as he was about to sign a bull to extinguish the Jesuit order, and it just so happened that Clement XIV would come into play and follow right along, being an adversary of the Jesuits and the things they were doing, and they signed the bull to extinguish the Jesuits, and that was at the same time that the Illuminati would come into being. What is the connection there?
Well, the Jesuits were suppressed by the Pope in 1773, as you know, after the Pope conducted a 4-year investigation. And he was Ganglianelli was his name. He was a Franciscan. And he was put there by the Bourbons because the Jesuits had so resisted the Bourbon dynasty in Spain and in France. So they didn't want any kind of a Jesuit influence from the Pope, so they had Ganglianelli elected with their influence because they were high knights of Malta. And then Ganglianelli comes to power, and after Clement had been poisoned, as you said, he conducts a 4-year investigation, suppresses the Jesuits in 1773, and when that happens, the Jesuits go underground. So they start to found different orders, and one of their orders they're going to found is in their native place of power, which is in Bavaria. And the Jesuits will be in control of the Wittelsbach dynasty. And so they have a church in Munich, the Church of St. Michael's. It's right down the street from the Archbishop's Cathedral. I've been there. So when the Jesuits were suppressed, they just started their Bavarian Illuminati out of Ingolstadt College, which is in Bavaria. And they used one of their canon law professors, who was Adam Weishaupt, who was not a Jew. He was a German. Remember, the Jesuits had it on their constitutions that no Jew could be a member of the Jesuit order beginning in 1594, thereabouts.
Right.
When they altered their constitutions.
So the idea that you can see everywhere on the internet that Adam Weishaupt was a Jew, does that serve the Jesuits' interest at that point, having that?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does, because then the Jesuits can blame the Jews for the Illuminati. And I have another book here in the 1930s on the Illuminati, And it shows you of the 70 people that were involved in its founding, there was not one Jew in it. There were priests, there were Roman Catholic officers, some noblemen, but there was not one Jew that was involved with the founding of the Bavarian Illuminati.
Well, the Jews were famously the victims of the persecution of the Inquisitions. I mean, they were not, the Roman Catholic institution wasn't friendly to the Jews over the centuries.
That's correct. That's why you have morals who changed their names, said they weren't Jews, so that they would be spared from being murdered by the Inquisition. And the Inquisition had what was called Limpieza, which was a blood purity doctrine, where if you were 1/4, 1/8 Jew, you could be a professional or any of the like in Spain. That's what the SS borrowed from Spain, the Limpieza doctrine, when they started implementing the quote-unquote Jewish purity, the Aryan purity doctrine, which was not Aryan purity doctrine, it was finding who was a Jew so they can eliminate that seed. Because the Bible talks about the Hebrew Jewish Israelites as before we seed. So the devil would like to kill as many as he can. So he does it. He always does it racially. So back to the Illuminati, Weishaupt founds it, and also Weishaupt will use the Frankists Jews to help him. But the Frankists were not founders of the Illuminati.
Now, regarding people that the Jews that would be used by the Illuminati, it brings us to like something that's currently in the news that the media really can't keep out of the news anymore. It's the question of Epstein, and now Ghislaine Maxwell has been arrested. Many are speculating that this will lead to mass arrests of celebrities, perhaps politicians, wealthy men involved with the pedophile ring. What do you think about that?
I wonder it's a possibility because
they might be able to keep it under wraps. If she dies, they might be able to keep this whole thing under wraps. So that's what I was wondering.
Would it shock you to learn that the United States government has been sending millions of dollars to Guatemala? Yes, upwards of $800 million to Guatemala via a laundry list of NGOs and organizations like USAID, and turn Guatemala into the child kidnapping capital of the world. Yes, our tax dollars, your tax dollars, funneled through USAID has led to over 190,000 Guatemalan children being kidnapped from Guatemala and then trafficked into the United States. And the horrors that unfold after that. What happens to these children? Are they killed? Are they disappeared? Sexually abused and thrown away like garbage? Our next guest wanted to break this story right here on Redacted. He has the receipts. He was just in Guatemala. He's just left Guatemala. He's in El Salvador now. He's safe and sound, thankfully. Please welcome independent journalist Ryan Mata to the show. Ryan, great to see you. I mean, sort of following what was unfolding while you were in Guatemala and getting these receipts, and it's an unbelievable story. Can you just paint a 30,000-foot level view of this for our audience? What have you uncovered?
Yeah, Clayton. So you've had me on your show several times to talk about my documentaries, which expose the world's largest child trafficking network that's being ran by our government. So out of the last 4 years, there has been 452,121 migrant children have been trafficked from 180 different nations all around the world into America, where our government takes possession of these children and is now openly admitted to losing 350,000 of them. So after my last documentary release, I was contacted by the Attorney General of Guatemala, and she asked if I could come to Guatemala to sit down with her team and talk about the amount of children that are being kidnapped out of Guatemala. So I started digging into that, found out that 42 to 48% of those children have came from Guatemala alone. That means out of the last 4 years, 190,052 children have been kidnapped out of Guatemala, trafficked into America, and processed into this child trafficking network migratorily by our government. To put that into context, the population size of Guatemala is 15 million. Their child population is 7 million. So over 3% of their entire child population has been kidnapped and trafficked out of Guatemala into America. And they've done so through this network of NGOs that are all being funded by USAID.
So USAID, of course, is now being closed, shut down under Doge, under Trump. Democrats are freaking out about it. They're trying to bring articles of impeachment against Trump. They're calling for Elon Musk's head. But what at the heart of USAID is an absolutely demonic, almost I would say satanic organization that has been involved in this. Now, you've got the receipts. So let's talk about what you've uncovered from the documents here and what you've seen during your time there in Guatemala.
So, Clayton, when I got contacted by the Attorney General, right, I hired a private investigator firm to track every penny that our government has sent to Guatemala over the last 4 years. So that number that you stated, we're right in the open, $797 million has basically been taken out of our taxpayer money and shipped into Guatemala, unaccounted for. There's no oversight over this money. And then he did me a favor. He went back all the way back to 2012. Guess what? $4 billion, over $4 billion has been funneled into Guatemala since 2012, and I have the receipts for that. So because my name has gotten pretty big in Guatemala, and they know they can't trust their government, they can't trust their news, it's all being ran by USAID, the government's rotted to the core, the only one good in that government is the Attorney General's office. I had a whistleblower come forward and handed me a thumb drive, and on that thumb drive is offshore bank accounts of Ambassador Todd Robinson, a previous Attorney General, Thelma Aldana. So Thelma Aldana is now a fugitive in Guatemala. She's on the run. She's being protected by our State Department. She's getting awards by Anthony Blinken. And I have her offshore bank accounts. A woman that was making $40,000 to $50,000 a year has offshore bank accounts, not just one, multiple, with millions of dollars in them, Clayton, millions of dollars. Yeah, Todd Robinson, the previous ambassador to Guatemala, who was the ambassador to Guatemala from 2014 to 2017, has offshore bank accounts with millions of dollars in them. And there was transactions taking place in those offshore accounts when he was the ambassador. And then he was promoted by Anthony Blinken to like the top narcotics cop of the world.
So do we know where this money directly came from? Have you been able to track where it came from? Were these payments coming through these NGOs funneled from USAID?
Not yet. That's why I'm coming here to break this story, because we need somebody like Kash Patel. We need somebody like Pam Bondi, somebody that has access to get that information that I don't have access to. I just got lucky to get this thumb drive, and I promised them that I would put it out here and give it to the world. And that's what I'm doing. That's why I'm on your show. It's not my information. We need people at the highest level to investigate these criminals. And I got one more for you, Clayton.
Oh, yeah, please.
So in this list is a declassified internal document from within Guatemala, and it looks like it would be the equivalent, I believe, of like our Secret Service or our CIA. Somebody at the highest level ordered this investigation, and this is what the previous president, Jimmy Morales, in 2017 was calling for an investigation into Todd Robinson, because allegedly Todd Robinson was raping little boys over here in Guatemala. So I get this document that was this investigation done into Todd Robinson in 2017, and I had it translated into English. And it basically states that Todd Robinson is, number one, a raging alcoholic. He's gay. He has 2 gay lovers. One of them works at the U.S. Embassy, and one was a Guatemalan national. This man would get drunk. There wasn't a meeting or anything that happened that Todd Robinson did that didn't involve drinks. He was a huge raging alcoholic, and he would throw these Diddy-style freak-off parties at his private palace in Guatemala, where he was having the cartels deliver little boys to his property. And there's allegedly that a 13-year-old boy was raped at one of these parties, and the mother filed a police report and an investigation into him. And he used his powers inside the Guatemalan police departments to destroy that evidence. And that's what Jimmy Morales was calling for, for an investigation into Todd Robinson. And that's why our government, our State Department, was hell-bent on overthrowing Jimmy Morales. If you go back to 2017, there was a coup attempt. And that coup attempt came a couple months after Jimmy Morales called for the investigation. And then at one of his freak-off parties, he gets so drunk that he goes and takes a gun from a security guard, starts shooting the gun into the air. The security guard tries to get his gun back. A scuffle breaks out. The security guard is shot in the leg, and nobody to this day has ever heard or spoke to that security guard again. And this is an internal document that I sent you this morning in an email from some office in Guatemala. And I've now given all this information to the Guatemalan authorities as well.
Who exactly is Todd Robinson, for our audience who's not familiar with him?
That is a great question. Todd Robinson graduated from Georgetown University in 1985, and then in 86 was immediately picked up by our State Department. And since then, he's gone from organization to organization to organization. These are job titles that I don't know. I've never even heard of these positions, but they're somehow in our government. And then it goes all the way up to his last position, when he was just removed from his previous position. Give me 2 seconds, and I'll pull that up here for you, and I'll tell you the exact title of that position. Wait for it. Okay, here it is. So he was just the Assistant Secretary of State for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs. So he's the top international narcotics and law enforcement officer in the world. And we now have the worst drug epidemic ever in American history. And that's the guy who's responsible for it.
Yeah, I was wondering.
Well, I I'm totally convinced the men of power that are involved with Epstein, nothing's happening to them.
Right.
Clinton is untouchable. You name him, the prince over there in England, he's untouchable. They're all untouchable. Nobody's going to jail. Nobody's getting prosecuted. But maybe there will be some lower individuals that may be blamed for it, but there will not be any men of power that will be blamed. And she will not talk. Something will happen to her. She will go somewhere. Something will happen. But she's not going to do any talking because she's dangerous. And they're going to do to her what they did to that madam in Washington, D.C. when they hung her in Florida because she knew all the names of the congressmen that were going to her house of prostitution. So if this woman is going to talk, even though her father was very well-to-do, she knows it's over. So I'm sure they've come to a deal, and they know they can't kill her outrightly like they killed Epstein, but she is not going to talk.
Very interesting. I appreciate your insight. Now, I have another question I wanted to kind of put out there. I can remember when you were saying there would be, this is years ago, you've been, I've been following you for quite a while, and you were saying there would be a new right, a neo-nationalism that would come, that we could expect, that would arise from international provocateurs, that communist agitators would drive white people to reactionary right-wing fascism. And since social pressure mounts in this racially specific street revolution, it seems to instigate the call for the white population to say, hey, wait a minute, white lives matter. And this draws us into a large-scale racial dialectic, kind of like what we're seeing in South Africa at the same time. What would you say about that?
Absolutely right. We have to remember the backdrop of this. The Western civilization was not founded by Roman Catholics. It was founded by white Anglo-Saxon Protestants and Baptists. And at the time of the Revolution, there were 3.5 million white Protestants and Baptists. There were 500,000 black slaves and freedmen. There were 30,000 Roman Catholics and 24 Catholic priests. So the population was no more than 1% Roman Catholic. And so the Jesuits had to set out for the destruction of the Protestantism and the white race peoples of North America. So one of their plans was, when they were using King George III with the slave trade, King George refused to allow the colonies to stop the slave trade into the colonies. And Jefferson writes about that in in the particular paragraph of the Declaration of Independence that is not allowed to be in. And I should say that Jefferson and the other four writers, because Roger Sherman was a man of God who wrote the Declaration, he had as much influence as Jefferson. And also in that paragraph, it talks about that King George would use these blacks of the slave trade to rouse them up to kill the people of the colonies. And that's exactly what we're seeing today. Great Britain, controlled by the papacy, has always sought to use the blacks to kill the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants and Baptists of North America. And that's why the Jesuits have stopped every Back to Africa movement that's ever happened. And they stopped the last one in the 1930s using FDR, who was controlled by Jesuit Edmund Walsh. So that's their purpose. That's why they gave these blacks all this welfare for all these years, give them all this money, encourage these black women to have all these illegitimate children with no fathers, give them $1,500 a month for them so they can continue to breed this fatherless black population that's taught to hate white people in general and to blame them for all their economic setbacks.
Campuses across the West are echo chambers of leftist ideology, often extreme left ideology that is intolerant of other views, that boast about diversity, equity and inclusion, but they are openly hostile to those who hold mainstream conservative values. But one student at an elite American university has fought back against the anti-white hatred and groupthink he has witnessed firsthand on campus, and he has been surprisingly successful. That student is Daniel Schmidt from the University of Chicago, and he joins me now. Daniel, is it true you were almost expelled for exposing a professor's anti-white course?
Yeah, that's true. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, no, that's 100% true. Let me sort of paint the picture. So I get to this elite university, the University of Chicago, and I see this class, and it's called The Problem of Whiteness. And, I don't know if you're like me, but when I first heard that class, I was like, what the heck is that suggesting that there's a problem with white people or whiteness and there's a solution? I mean, what's going on here? This is insane. This is clearly racist. It's clearly anti-white. So I saw this class and I called it out on my Twitter. I said it's the most egregious example of anti-white hatred I've ever seen. And shortly afterward, the professor who was teaching this class, she filed 2 separate complaints to get me expelled. She said I led a harassment campaign against her, that I was inciting violence. And yeah, she filed 2 separate complaints. Now, fortunately, my school refused to expel me. But then she went to the New York Times. The New York Times wrote this massive hit piece on me, calling me a cyberbully, saying I instigated this campaign. And then to top it off, CNN wrote an article calling me a bully. So yeah, that's sort of what you get in America. And I'm sure around the world if you're a white student and you call this stuff out. So yeah.
Oh, well, thank God you've got the strength to put up with this, because I think that would scare off most people to have these media giants going after you. Prominent people go to water with that sort of attention. So for you to take a stand, I'm very impressed indeed. And this started early with you. Within weeks of you starting at this university, you learned that you weren't allowed to participate in a debate tournament because you're white. Tell me what you did about that.
Yeah, well, it was absolutely insane because let me just paint a bit of a picture. I come from a middle class household in Tennessee, so a pretty rural area. I get to this university. Within weeks, I have these people running this debate tournament at my school tell me, yeah, this tournament's actually not open to white people. It's only open to non-white people. And, I've heard this stuff happen at universities. I always thought it was a bit exaggerated. It was a bit, to hype up media, but I experienced it in real time. And so I wrote an article about it. I had access to a newspaper at my school and I straight up just exposed it. I tried my best. And then fortunately, a few national outlets picked it up. And then the year later, so this year, the debate did not happen. And I don't know for certain if it was because of what I did, but I have to imagine they got some attention, they got some traction. So what I'm really trying to emphasize on all these interviews I do, so here and on Twitter, is if you're a student at a university, you have a lot more power than you think. I know it seems daunting, like, oh, I'm against the mob and I'm one voice. But you really do have a lot more power because these people are fragile. The administrations are fragile. And if you call it out, if you bring attention to it, you will be actually surprised how much you can achieve. So if there are any students listening in, I would really encourage you to, if you ever see something that you just know inside is not right, seriously consider speaking up, because I think you would be surprised how much change you could actually cause.
This is part of the agitation. Now the population is approximately 30% black. It is no 12%. That's nonsense. And so now that they've increased the population to this extent, now they can incite it to riots, raping, murder, knifing, stabbing in every major city, because a black-on-white race war is on. And it's exactly what the Jesuits pulled in Kenya in the 1950s with their Mau Mau uprising. So they've done this, but the blacks don't know they're being played. And so they're using them to drive the whites, the pagan whites in this country who don't read the Bible, the Reformation King James Bible, and they also don't know true history, and so they're complete suckers to be driven into the new right. And that's the purpose of Black Lives Matter. That's the purpose of Antifa. That's the purpose of having these. That's the purpose of telling the cops to stand down. This can't happen unless there's an order to the cops to stand down. So they're all ordered to that. So as this continues to go, it's going to drive white people to desperation, in conjunction with the bogus coronavirus pandemic, to drive the whites to demonstration economically, culturally, into the new right. And the new right, I was taught the new right by a woman named Betty Mills, a very brilliant lady, World War II generation. Her husband was in Patton's army. And she said, it's the new right, Eric, it's coming. And when she alerted me to that like 30 years ago, she was absolutely right, with Louis Lehrman and Oliver North and William Casey, Reagan, the FEMA camps, all into the production of the new right night to Malta. So that's where we're going. They haven't deviated. And then you have Martin Lee with his book, The Beast Reawakens. about fascism, and then you have Betty Clermont's book on the neo-Catholic New Right movement.
Yep, indeed.
So that's exactly where we're going.
So I remember back, so at my age, 10 years ago, that we would, people on the internet would discuss the King Alfred plan and how that would lead to Rex 84 concentration camps. And it was hard for me to see back then how we could get to a point where we were looking at mass roundups of the black community, but by these carefully orchestrated riots and racial agitations, they're endangering the entire black community in this country, it seems to me.
Well, that's true. You got to remember, the majority of them hate white people. There's only a minority that are civil, kind blacks, and I call them minority civil blacks, and they're usually Bible-reading Christian people. But the majority hate white people. They would love to kill you, and they have nothing good to say about you because you're white. And so they're easily manipulated through their emotionalism to hate white people. They're programmed with Hollywood every day, as well as academia, lying about the evil wickedness of the whites every day in every way. And so therefore, since they're easily motivated emotionally, that's how they've been used, but they don't know that they are going to be rounded up.
And today we're going to be talking about COINTELPRO and all of the operations associated with this. And we're going to be talking about how this relates to what's about to take place and what your government has been preparing for the past how many years. Now we're here at the actual FBI website, or the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and we're at the vault, as they call it, and it says COINTELPRO. COINTELPRO, the FBI began it, which is short for Counterintelligence Program, back in 1956 to disrupt the activities of the Communist Party of the United States. In the 1960s, it was expanded to include a number of other domestic groups such as the Ku Klux Klan, or the KKK, the Socialist Workers' Party, and the Black Panther Party. All COINTELPRO operations were ended in 1971. Oh, but they weren't, and we're going to talk more about that. Although limited in scope, about 0.2% of the FBI's workload over a 15-year period, COINTELPRO was later rightfully criticized by Congress and the American people for abridging First Amendment rights and for other reasons. Yes, because your FBI is good at doing that. When have they ever followed the Constitution? But anyway, let's keep going, because then it says here are the groups that they list: white hate groups, New Left, Puerto Rican groups, black extremists, hoodwink, Cuba, Socialist Workers' Party, and espionage programs. Now, Wikipedia also gives a brief summary of COINTELPRO, and like I said, later on we'll be talking about how this relates to people like you and me, but it says here, COINTELPRO, which is the Counterintelligence Program, is a series of covert and often illegal projects conducted by the FBI aimed at surveilling, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting American political organizations, but let's not forget peoples too. So what is this all about? Spying and denying it, just like the NSA, or the No Such Agency, the same agency that was behind the cyber attack recently. But anyway, it says FBI records show that COINTELPRO resources targeted groups and individuals that the FBI deemed quote unquote subversive. And what you're going to see is that in a report that the FBI released back in 2000 that has to do with extremism, you're going to see exactly who they deem as subversive, and trust me, it's not who you think. But according to this, it included the anti-Vietnam War organizers, activists of the Civil Rights Movement or the Black Power Movement, and also the Black Panther Party, the feminist organization, anti-colonial movements such as Puerto Rican independence groups, and a variety of other organizations that were part of the New Left, including KKK and white supremacist groups. Not to mention the Red Scare and the communist propaganda back then, because if you did not agree with the government said, you could have been considered a communist and you would have had to been locked up and detained for further questioning. And we know that nothing is new under the sun. Are they about to do that again? Is terrorism and extremism the new communism? Oh, how history repeats itself. But now we're going to be talking more about how this led into the King Alfred Plan, and we're going to be going over Rex 84, Operation Garden Plot, and the McCarran Act. And I know I've gone over some of this before, but we're going to reiterate it so you can see how it's all related. And now we're going to be talking about why your government is constantly pushing the extremism and terrorism agenda, especially at a time like this, because who are the real extremists and terrorists? But according to this, the Rex 84 program, which is Readiness Exercise 1984, was a program originally established on the reasoning that if a, quote, mass exodus of illegal aliens crossed the Mexican-U.S. border, they would then be quickly rounded up and detained in detention centers by FEMA. Existence of the Rex 84 plan was first revealed during the Iran-Contra hearings back in 1987 and subsequently reported by the Miami Herald back in 1987, quote, these camps are to be operated by FEMA should martial law need to be implemented in the U.S., and all it would take is a presidential signature on a proclamation and the Attorney General's signature on a warrant to which a list of names is attached. But your government has already signed in unconstitutional executive orders that already paved the way for these things. But let's keep going, and there you have it. The real purpose of FEMA is to not only protect the government, but to be its principal vehicle for martial law, and we've talked about this. This is why FEMA could not respond immediately to Hurricane Katrina, because humanitarian efforts were no longer part of its job description under the DHS. Talking about Operation Garden Plot and how this relates with Readiness Exercise or Rex 84. Now, Operation Garden Plot is a general U.S. Army and National Guard plan to respond to major domestic civil disturbances within the United States. That's why you're seeing all of these drills, such as Operation Cascadia Rising that occurred last year, and even Gotham Shield that occurred a few weeks ago. That's why all of this stuff is happening. They're not just doing this for fun. They're not just doing this, for emergency readiness. Oh my goodness, we know exactly what they're doing. But it says the plan was developed in response to the civil disorders of the 1960s and is now under control of the U.S. Northern Command, or NORTHCOM. And note how they too were involved when it comes to Operation Gotham Shield. It provides federal military and law enforcement assistance to local governments during times of major civil disturbances. And by the way, Operation Gotham Shield had to do with the nuclear detonation drill in New York and New Jersey, and there's been plenty of predictive programming when it comes to this. And that's also why you're seeing the emergency alert system tests that are going on with FEMA almost every single year now.
And that was made known in the Iran-Contra hearing with Oliver North, when they admitted that 21 million blacks are going to be rounded up for the camps. That came out publicly, and I have it on my PowerPoint.
And so once you have those camps rounding up all those people, then it just can become a general roundup to anybody who has a problem with it can all of a sudden get caught up in that, it seems to me.
Well, yeah, I think it's first going to be the roundups of the blacks because they're doing so much damage. And then it's going to be the roundups of the white liberal communists, which is Antifa. And then it's going to be the roundup of the alien, Hispanic, Roman Catholic invaders that commit crime everywhere, every day, all throughout Texas, wherever they go.
Yeah, we haven't seen illegal immigrants rioting yet.
They're not immigrants. You mistake
right.
They call them immigrants.
Indeed.
They're not immigrants. They're invaders.
Yeah, indeed, I stand corrected.
They have no intention of being Americans. They have no intention of wanting to speak English. They have no intention of learning our history. They hate us. And they're brought up here by the Jesuits running South America, brainwashing them how evil the Yankee is. Okay? So
Indeed.
It's more correct to call them alien invaders than not immigrants.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Justice to the people who are truly immigrants, because it takes them 8 to 10 years to finally get citizenship. I had a couple of Mexican students with me, and it took them 10 years to become citizens. So they were very upset about this, letting all these aliens in here and then giving them citizenship, and rightfully so.
Yeah, I dare.
All these alien Roman Catholic Hispanic invaders that are completely devoted to the priest, and that's what the Hispanics, the invaders, the blacks, they're going to round up the homosexuals too. They're all getting rounded up because they've shoved this radical homosexual agenda, LGBTQ, down our throats for the last 50, 60 years. They're going to the camps too. Another one's going to be the Muslims. They're going to the camps with all the violence they do to us every day and their hatred for us and their filthy Sharia law. shoving everything they can down our throats. That's why they put those Muslims in the Congress. So they're gone. So that's what the fifth group. The sixth group is going to be the Jews. They have to blame some national disaster on the Jews because that's the real group they want, in conjunction with people like me who are Bible-believing, born-again Protestants and Baptists who are absolutely conservative and want to preserve some of our wealth, middle class, and so on, gun ownership. And so they're going to round this up too. So it's really a six-sided enemy they're after, and it's very similar to what Hitler did in Nazi Germany.
Yeah, I wanted to point that out, that it's clear to me that we're in a left versus right dialectic, which is what occurred in Germany. It was communism versus nationalism. At least that's what the public viewed it as. And like America, Germany wanted a strong leader to defend Germany, but ultimately it seems that they were betrayed by a preponderance of well-placed Illuminati agents, including Hitler himself, who didn't turn out to be a nationalist at all. In fact, he did everything that would bring about the destruction of Germany and not its defense. And
right.
He almost appears that he worked with Stalin. Yeah.
Yep. Well, yeah, that's right. Hitler worked with Stalin. You can get that book, Hitler's Traitor. Shows you Bormann was the liaison between Hitler and Stalin. But yeah, that's exactly what they've done. Remember, this couldn't happen had not the German people been betrayed in World War I. Remember, you had the Second Reich, and the Second German Reich was Protestant. The first was Rome. You can never overlook the religious matter of this. Who's Catholic? Who's Protestant? Who's Jewish? You always have to ask what the religion of these people are.
Right.
So you have the Second German Reich. It was Protestant. It was a wonderful time. Prussia was powerful. Germany was the greatest nation in Europe. Had the most scientific advancements, had the best food, had the highest culture. They were Protestant, Lutheran. However, they were corrupted by Jesuit rationalism. And so the Lutheran Church went apostate. And so by going apostate, then you have the Kaiser firing Bismarck in 1890, which Bismarck kept the peace between Germany and Russia. Bismarck was responsible with the German Parliament for expelling the Jesuits out of Germany in 1871. They remained expelled till the Kaiser readmitted them in June of 1917. So the Kaiser also betrayed the German people when he would not evacuate 1 million German soldiers from the Eastern Front when the Bolsheviks left World War I. So that meant the Kaiser facilitated the defeat of the German people so they could be blamed for World War I when they were the least ones to be blamed. And so now they're defeated. They've taken the Danzig Corridor. They've taken a portion of Prussia. The Versailles Treaty was a wicked, sinful treaty, putting all the war guilt on Germany, which they never repaid until back in like 2010 or so. It was a horrible, terrible thing done to them. And so that paved the way for Hitler to come to power. And Hitler hated the Germans. He was an Austrian. He said the Germans, if you don't go to total war, then you deserve to be destroyed. Hitler hated the Germans just like the Jesuits, and so that's why he was never killed in a bunker. He escaped and died later.
Right. It looks like that a whole contingent of them came into the United States and were used by the CIA and went into South America, into Argentina. Is that right? Argentina,
correct.
I think.
Absolutely correct. You have the Vatican Lines. The book you want to read on this, which is one of the very best. It's written by an Irish Roman Catholic, Irish-American Roman Catholic named, it's called Unholy Trinity, and he went to Boston College. And anyway, it's a very good book. It talks about the Vatican Rad Lines. He writes about the Rad Lines and Unholy Trinity, and shows that the SS particularly was brought out of Europe into Ireland, America, Canada.
I think it's Peter Levinda. Is that who you're thinking of, Eric? Peter Levinda? I think he's done some work on
John Loftus.
John Loftus, okay.
Peter Levinda's good. But John Loftus, he writes on Holy Trinity. He also writes Secret War Against the Jews.
Yes, sir. Okay, just a few more things. I appreciate your time. Now, leading up to World War I and World War II, something had happened that was remarkable in the world. I mean, the French had been destroyed by the agitation in their revolution, but in America, a Protestant revolution had taken place that was where there were no war crimes, and once they won their independence, they instituted a successful Protestant republic here in America. And at that time, um, you have a wide-ranging historical knowledge. So what was happening when the European nobility, the knighthoods, and the papacy, and this Holy Alliance met together in the Congress of Vienna, 1814 to 1815, and then later the Congress of Verona, 1822, and they joined in a pact to work asymmetrically through third parties like anarchist groups and Marxist communists to fight a universal war against all popular governments and private liberties and private citizenship even. And they were intent on bringing this to ruin. So that would lead us to a World War One.
All the Congress of Vienna, everything after Napoleon Bonaparte and the French Revolution was designed to overthrow the West with the Counter-Reformation. And remember the Jesuits ran the French Revolution? The Russian historians of the Russian Revolution will tell you that the same people that caused the French Revolution caused the Bolshevik Revolution. And so it's the Jesuits. And it's not the Jews. And I show you, there's a book you want to get called Descent into Darkness by James J. Zacco. And he writes this in 1965. He's a priest who writes at Notre Dame. And he shows you right in there that Stalin and Lenin readmitted the Jesuits into Russia in 1922 after they'd been expelled by the great Alexander I in 1820. So the whole thing, the Jesuits ran the French Revolution, as they did the Bolshevik Revolution. The French Revolution was intended to kill the enemies of the Jesuits who were part of persecuting, part of suppressing them. And so that's why they killed Louis XVI, because his grandfather Louis XV expelled the Jesuits from France. And then that's why you have the destruction of Marie Antoinette. They behead her. Why? Because her mother, Maria Theresa, kicked the Jesuits out of Austria.
Do you think, on some level, as the Jesuit order is bringing in its novices and bringing in its next generation of orders and training them up, that these new generations take on the vendetta of their masters and go about in the world to exact revenge for these things over the time? You can even see this revenge taking place a century later, it seems, in history.
And Lincoln said the Jesuits never forget nor forsake. And you can find that in 50 Years in the Church of Rome by Charles Chineke, when Lincoln was his attorney. When Lincoln saved him from being convicted and lynched by the Jesuits. And he said that the Jesuits, he said, I want to tell you, Mr. Lincoln, he said he was crying, and Mr. Lincoln said, what are you crying for? He says, your enemies have been vanquished, and you're free to go. And he said, Mr. Lincoln, I'm not crying for me, but I'm crying for you. He said, because I saw no less than the sense of death on the faces of 11 Jesuits sitting in that courtroom. And when Chineke was released, that was by Lincoln's defense. That was the beginning of the Jesuit plot to kill him. You can read all about it in 50 Years in the Church of Rome. So yes, the Jesuits never forget. They always get even. If they have to wait 200 years, they're going to get even.
Indeed. All right, just one or two more.
Remember, Sean, it's a military order.
Indeed.
It's all military. And so that's why they call themselves the company, just like the CIA. In fact, the CIA was patterned after the Jesuit order.
Now, it's curious that if you watch closely, that Francis I is the first Bergoglio, this is a family name, to first Jesuit to become the Pope. And right before he was, when the previous Pope was still in there, Benedictine, the Jesuits had a Congress, and they got together and they elected a new Secretary General of the Superior General. And they did that right at just a few years before Francis I came in. And I've heard people speculate that perhaps Bergoglio was voted to become the Black Pope at the time, to become the Superior General, and that his first moves were to place a secondary Superior General in plain sight, and then to move to get himself to, and they positioned him as the Pope. So it's possible that he's on an occultic level, he's a Black Pope and the White Pope at the same time. I think that's interesting.
No. That's not according to their constitution. The Jesuits are a military machine. They took the papacy, they had their Bergoglio, and they made him Pope. He's a tough guy. He doesn't have the brains, but he has the tough. The guy with the brains is Arturo Sosa. He's the guy with the brains. And so he's the general, without a question of a doubt. And the white folk, indeed, submits to him. In fact, it's in Roman Catholic canon law that the Pope must have a Jesuit confessor.
Right.
And so, therefore, this Jesuit Pope is a Jesuit confessor, probably the son of high, probably an assistant. There's 10 assistant generals. And so he confesses, and it all goes in black hole, and everything, the machine keeps working perfectly. Now, he's subject to Arturo Sosa, no doubt.
Right. It stands to reason that if he must confess to a Jesuit confessor, then those and they're the ones who can absolve his issues. Then they're an authority ultimately, or even over his mind. So that's an interesting point.
That's right. That's right. In fact, I learned that from Rabello in his book Vatican Empire. In 1965, thereabouts, he said absolutely the Pope must always have a Jesuit confessor. So it doesn't matter if he's a Jesuit or not. As long as he's confessing to a Jesuit confessor, the Jesuits will run the papacy. And because the Jesuits were set back a little bit more in the 1800s, remember, the 1800s are called the century of disaster, the Jesuit order. They were suppressed in France, Russia, Germany, kicked out of Costa Rica, they were kicked out of Britain again. This was a century of disaster for them. So when they finally got their power back completely, like in the 1880s, 1890s, they are absolutely never going to be deprived of their power again. And they'll use their international intelligence community and their assassins and their agents to eliminate anybody who's a serious enemy. The born identity is nothing more than the intelligence community with their Jesuit assets carrying out assassinations around the world. And that's why you have no real leaders anymore.
Yeah, what could go wrong with that? Now, on another point there, John Paul I, he was investigating the Vatican Bank. This is at a time when the John Calvi murder was rippling across headlines. The P2 propaganda duologue was being exposed. And he was mysteriously found dead in perfect health after 33 days.
Yeah, he was poisoned. He was poisoned by agent. Well, if you want to get a book, it'll tell you who did it. It's called Bullet to the Bone, written by a mafioso in the Colombo family. And he tells he was an assassin, and he and another guy went over there and they poisoned the Pope. There's Bullet to the Bone. He tells the whole story. And so they poisoned him, and then found him on the floor with like this horrible grimace on his face, according to Admiral Manhattan in his book Murder in the Vatican. So that's right. They killed him after 33 days to make it known that it's the Masonic Lodge that did it. It's the Masonic Lodge run by the Jesuits, because the Jesuits are the authors of all the high rites of every brand of Freemasonry, especially Scottish Rite.
Indeed.
And the book you want to get on this to show the Masonic connection is In God's Name by David Gallup.
Excellent. Now, I can't help but point out that yesterday Donald Trump had done some more executive orders relating to China, and it's just a question of when he's going to activate the Industrial Act. It escapes me what the name of it is, but where he can control industry. And it seems that there are forces looking for the right opportunity, perhaps widespread social unrest or race riots, where they might be able to successfully land a military invasion. You've been talking about that for some time, and it looks like we're diametrically opposed to China, and it seems like everything is kind of in motion in this direction now.
That's ultimately where they want to go, but they have other things they have to accomplish here first. Okay? They have to foment their race war, civil war here first. That will then justify the rise of, justify the declaration of martial law that they wanted to have, that they wanted to instill ever since the 80s with the new rights. And so then they'll implement their martial law. They'll be doing their roundups, and about this time, we'll have to get involved in a two-front foreign war. And for that to happen, there has to be the destruction of some national monument. for the purpose of uniting all the people in the right for the most part, and some of the left, to go to war with whoever does this. And I maintain the Jesuits are going to destroy the Capitol. They're going to blow it up, as they told us in their movies, Live Free and Die Hard with Bruce Willis, Jeffrey Mason, and others.
Yep.
And so when they blow up the Capitol building, just as they destroy the Reichstag in Germany, then you can declare a state of national emergency, martial law, and begin the roundups. So that's going to be the end of Congress. And so then the president will assume full powers during this time of emergency, and it might be Trump, but I'm tending to think it may well be Pence, because Pence is a stone cold, calculating individual, and his brother Greg was trained by Jesuits for 7 years. So his brother will be his advisor, and Pence uniting the evangelicals and the Catholics together, as Hitler did, uniting the Lutherans and the Catholics together against the common enemy of communism. It's going to be the similar route they're taking.
Interesting. Indeed.
So then after they do that, then after they have their roundups and their camps, because we got 600 camps? Got 3 of them here in Pennsylvania at least. Then they have these secret camps in the woods you rarely see. I saw one here in Pennsylvania once from the Capitol. 2 of them deep in the forest. I go, whoa, what's this? So they have them all around. And the Department of Homeland Security is run by the Jesuits. And see, they're going to nationalize everything. They have the police stand down, so they're going to nationalize the cops. They're not going to be local cops anymore. That's what Castro did in Cuba.
Right.
And so when they nationalize all the cops, they're all going to be Department of Homeland Security, and all subject to Washington, and all subject to the Commander-in-Chief. And when they do that, then they'll have their roundups. They'll have the thing that's going on here, and then they're going to have their national crisis. So this is, Iran blew up the Capitol building because they have to destroy Shia Islam before the Pope can unite the Wahhabis once again under his control. Because Wahhabism was created by the papacy to the British. It's Masonic. You have the author of the Arabian Nights involved in that. What was his name? But then you have to have the regathering of the Sunnis. And you can't have that with the Shia. So Shia have to go. There has to be war against Islam, against Shia Islam in Iran. And then when they're killed down, then the Sunnis will unite and under the papacy, and the Sunnis will be the friends of the Sunnis will be the friends of the Russians and of the Chinese. And then ultimately, when we are defeated deliberately with the betrayal of our Navy and our troops overseas, as Hitler did the same thing to his Navy and to his troops in the East and in the West, then we will be successfully invaded by the Muslims, the Asians, and the Russians all working together.
So they're determined to make sure that it's a full invasion that cannot possibly be defended against. And you were pointing out that Hitler sacrificed his army, and it seems like Napoleon did the same thing. So
that's correct. Yep.
All right.
Sacrificed his army in 1812, gave it over to the Cossacks in the snows. Hitler sacrificed his army in the snows of Russia, had them invade with summer uniforms. Total disgrace. And then he has him surrender. He has Paulus surrenders. He loses 91,000 troops. Only 5,000 come back, and they're all Roman Catholics.
Right.
All the Lutherans died in the Russian Jesuit gulag. Yep.
All right. Well, one final point. It looks like we're going to soon see a new prince to take the throne in Britain, and it's noticeable that the first horse in the biblical apocalypse is a rider on a white horse who is given a crown and authority, and he goes out to make war. So, I guess my question: are we looking at the last days as we approach this?
No, we're not in the last days. The last days is a phrase exclusively for Israel. Last days is not for the church, because the appearing of Christ has always been imminent. Talks about Hebrew, where in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son. It's the last days for Israel. It's the 70 weeks of Daniel. It's come to the end. It's the last days, and then we have the gap between the 70th and 69th and 70th week. And the 70th week, and then towards the last half of the Great Tribulation, that's the last days. But the last days have nothing to do with the church. The appearing of Christ has always been imminent. That's the blessed hope of Titus 2:13 and 14. So what we're having here is we're exhorting one another as we see the day approach in the book of Hebrews. And what's the day? The day of the Lord. We're not going to live to it, but we see the setting being set up for it.
Indeed.
And as far as Revelation 6 is concerned, it's not the four horsemen. There are four horses of the one horseman who rides it. Just as Christ is described by the four Gospels, the beast, the Antichrist, is described by the four horses that he rides.
Okay.
And you can. I thought I came up with that when I was reading in the Antichrist by that one particular writer. What was his name? I can't remember. It's a very ancient writer. And but it's going to be the final Roman Caesar of Revelation 17:10. Or it's A.W. Pink. A.W. Pink in his book The Antichrist. He shows the Antichrist is rising four different horses. But the final Pope of Rome is the final Roman Caesar. He's the seventh Roman Caesar, Revelation 17:10. He's slain with a sword, according to Revelation 13:14. And then he comes back to life. And then as he comes back to life, he's the eighth Roman Caesar, yet one of the seven. So he's the seventh Roman Caesar that's come back to life. So I maintain that the final Pope of Rome will come. He will sign the 7-year agreement in Daniel 9:27. He'll be slain towards the middle of it. He'll come back to life. He'll be the risen Pope will be the Antichrist. So it's not anybody other than the risen Pope. I don't believe any of that. Tim, what's his name, with the Antichrist and a cup of tea. The Antichrist has to be a Roman of Revelation 17. All those 7 heads and 10 horns, the 7 heads are 7 Roman Caesars, and the 7 hills on which Rome sits. And so the Antichrist is going to be the final Pope of Rome, slain with a sword, risen from the dead, to be devil-possessed, and rule the world for 42 months.
And just having been a follower of kind of some of your earlier discussions on this topic, it looks like that we can expect that the Roman Catholic center of worship in Rome and the Muslim center of worship in Mecca and Medina are going to be engineered to be destroyed at this time, and this is how it'll be a merger of a one world religion that they basically cannot be opposed, and that it looks like that at that time the Antichrist will set up his shop in Babylon and there
That's
in
correct.
Iraq.
Very good, Sean. Absolutely right. We're going to see that the Rome must be destroyed, and that's what the 10 kings will do in Revelation 17. Because the woman, the rising beast is Rome. It's that city, Revelation 17:18. And so therefore, but that will be after the church departs from this earth. So we will not see the destruction of Rome.
Right.
But we may well see the very destruction of Mecca and Medina and the mosques in Jerusalem, and that very well may be blamed on America, because there will be a war in the Middle East. That's why we have a base there, our big army base, so that Americans can be blamed for the destruction of those mosques. And when that happens, I have Muslims tell me, because I told them that's what's going to happen. He said, no, I would never allow that. I said, yeah, that's what's going to happen, and you need to leave this place. So I'm in Jordan, and I can have a house there. I said, you need to go back to Jordan. And then he got real quiet. He was a taxi cab driver, and he said, if that would ever happen, we would teach our children to hate and kill every American we could find until we killed them all. That's what he said to me.
Well, their religion and their doctrine is calculable. So, the people that would have them to take this position would know exactly how to push their buttons and how to, to get them to react in that way. It's interesting in the news now, the Council of American Islamic Relations fellow, that his face is the typical guy you see that come out, the spokesman, has now come out and aligned himself directly with Black Lives Matter and with Antifa and defunding the police.
See,
and so,
I'm sorry.
No, it's
that's exactly what I said. They're all going to align together.
Right.
The homosexuals are going to align with them. The Muslims, the Black Lives Matter, Antifa. Now the alien Hispanic invaders are aligning with them. Black Lives Matter in Spanish. I've seen their things.
Right.
So they're all uniting with
think I lost you there, Eric. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Who is that? When you have these open and notorious Jews backing it, like Soros and others, now they can blame the Jews. They're aligning them all together. And when this new right comes to power with these angry, tough white men that are in the octagon and have become very tough, you're going to see a bunch of killers like you've never seen in your life. And these blacks are going to be deathly afraid of them. They're all tatted up, they're pierced, they're fierce, they're angry, they're armed, and they have the power of the state. And it's going to be terrifying.
Yeah, the biker gangs are being politicized for it too, and seem to all be joined in their determination to be pro-American and in this national sentiment, which, like as we've seen in Germany, can go terribly wrong. But I wanted to just tell you, Eric, I wanted to.
But one thing more. Remember, nationalism is biblical.
Right.
We are nationalists, but we don't invade other countries.
Right. But I don't think Hitler. I don't think Hitler was a nationalist. I mean, he said that he was, but he ultimately.
No, he was an internationalist.
Right.
Anybody that invades other countries with your armies is an internationalist, empiricist, building an empire. And biblical Protestant and Baptist nationalism does not do that. It maintains a system of isolation. Its foreign policy is isolationism. That's why we have the Monroe Doctrine. But whenever you invade other countries and start intervening in other people's affairs, like this government, like this military government has done since March 9th, 1933, it is a papal, internationalist, invading communist government, soon to morph into new right socialist fascism.
Excellent.
And it could never have happened without the communists.
Well, as we were saying, as you like to point out, Karl Marx was tutored by Peter Bex, who would become the superior general ultimately.
Right.
So
that's right. And the source for that is Bismarck.
Right.
Bismarck published that. Yeah.
All right. Well, I wanted to just take a minute and thank you, Eric Jon Phelps, for spending so much of your time with us, and I hope we can do it again more. Maybe like once or twice a month we could get together like this. It'd be great.
Yeah, that's fine. That would be fine, Sean. So appreciate you having me on, and go to my website, VaticanAssassins.org, or 24/7 World Radio, and listen to my broadcast for free. And I have things in there that you might be willing to think about purchasing. So
yeah, I noticed that you had the Gray People. It's a very hard to find book that you offer on your website. So I was definitely going to pick that up, maybe several copies of it.
Yeah, make sure you get the Gray People, and then you can buy Coming Out of the Ice. Victor Herman's works are epic. He warned about the KGB and the CIA working together, and so we owe much to that surviving Jew, the only American that survived Henry Ford's shipping of the Jews over to Russia to build Gorky.
Right, which we might point out that it was implemented by Skull and Bonesmen from inside the White House. That's
right. That's right. Same Skull and Bonesmen that will be around to put Mao in power, because without Skull and Bones, Mao doesn't come to power. Without Skull and Bones, Abel Herman, you don't have Lend-Lease give $11.2 billion to Joseph Stalin. That's why they killed Anthony Sutton. He wrote America's Secret Establishment. That was the end for Anthony. That was the last straw for him.
It was it was a work of conscience on his part, I think. I think he knew exactly what he was dealing with.
Yes, he did. But he was brave enough to expose it. And just like Eyes Wide Shut, and what's his name, Madame Malta, who made that movie?
Right.
You remember his name? Come on.
I'm thinking too.
Anyway,
I want to say Francis Ford Coppola. That's not the right name. But okay. Well, anyway, let me let you get back to your night, Eric. You have a wonderful evening, and Lord bless you, and we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, you too, Sean. Bless you too, and your listeners. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, so that was our call with Eric Jon Phelps, and we can see that he has a lot of interesting things to say. Needless to say, he doesn't trust the international world elites, and from his point of view, They are operating as they have been doing so for a long time from the colleges and the universities out of Rome. And it might be pointed out that the Jesuits were the foremost intelligence agency in the world at the time, having run the Inquisition, having members in every single court of every king and every nation in the world who could speak any language and who could operate inside any religious group or any nationality or any country in the world. Even famously in the court of the Chinese, Francis Xavier would go there himself, and eventually they would even have their own members within that court, within those families, and within those religious dynamics who could speak the language and who could inform the Jesuit order on every aspect and every shape of development within the politics of every nation. And so this is how you eventually get the rise of the organizations like the Central Intelligence Agency. And these are all topics that we'll go into later. And these are very controversial issues. And this is why we have constitutional protections against speech and against protection of our speech and protection of free press. And so we can learn the truth, even difficult truths, and expose them for all to see. So to point out that in France, during the French Revolution, the Jesuits controlled the court of the king and implemented absolute monarchism. But in the streets, there was a Jesuit-led radical revolution, which ultimately later would become communism. And in between these two very destructive forces, between the king being a tyrant and the people revolting against our authority, they were able to bring France to ruin. And they're in a war against free men who have free conscience, who freely think and have their own freedoms and constitutional protections and liberties. And their war is to destroy all popular government, of which America is the foremost popular government in the world. And as we're looking at examples of how the internationalist elite have been able to move segments of world populations from one area to another in order to create maximum destabilization and instability, because the belief systems between different groups, between Muslims, radical Muslim groups in Somalia, and white European people in Michigan, they're predictably and diametrically opposed. So they're creating the backdrop for wider racial riots and social instability. And look at the examples of how the international elite have been working hard to set this into motion and to incite a social destabilization on a world scale. We can see that the colonists in the American Revolution in the 1770s had no sooner conducted a rash tea party and tipping tons of politically unpopular tea into the Boston Harbor, but as soon as they had done it, the British aristocracy easily is able to predict that the America's population of sub-Saharan African slaves were quickly to become a political liability and could be transformed into a population of marauders and a destroying force within the Americas. And this is the perspective clearly of the British high command at the time. So we're listening to Michael Medved as he helps us make the point about how the European aristocracy sees a weakness and not a strength within our multicultural and multiracial population within the United States. So here's Michael Medved talking about the situation with the Tea Party.
In any argument, in any competition, if it goes on long enough, the force of exhaustion kicks in. And both sides say, look, I am willing to lose this thing. I just want it to be over. That was the situation on the road to revolution. In the reaction to the Boston Tea Party and the Coercive Acts, both sides were sick and tired of the struggle and making the same arguments over and over again. And we're ready for drastic events to unfold. After the Coercive Acts were passed in Parliament by huge majorities, more than 4-1 in most cases, one of the supporters of those measures said, "'Tis said America will be exasperated. Will she then take arms? She has neither army, navy, money, or men." Another observer, supporter of Lord North, said, "I say stand and deliver to the Americans." And he was rewarded with this sentiment by being appointed paymaster of the army. Lord North himself summed up the situation by saying, "We must control them or submit to them." The Americans also saw the situation as do or die. They had organized a Continental Congress in Philadelphia, trying to draw all the colonies together, not to talk about independence, they were far from ready for that, but to try to coordinate how they could most effectively resist these latest measures by the ministry and the crown. And George Washington, among others, rode off to Philadelphia, rode on horseback from his home in Mount Vernon. He was accompanied personally by Patrick Henry and Edmund Pendleton. And Pendleton saw Washington saying goodbye to his wife, Martha, who stood at the doorway that morning, and said, "God be with you, gentlemen." Pendleton wrote, "She seemed ready to make any sacrifice and was very cheerful, though I know she felt very anxious. She talked like a Spartan mother to her son on going to battle. I hope you will all stand firm. I know George will." She wrote to a relative who expressed concern, "Yes, I foresee consequences, dark days and darker nights, domestic happiness suspended, social enjoyments abandoned, property of every kind put in jeopardy by war perhaps, neighbors and friends at variance, and eternal separations on earth possible. But my mind is made up, my heart is in the cause. George is right, he is always right. God has promised to protect the righteous, and I will trust him." At the Continental Congress in Philadelphia, Washington was one of the delegates who seemed to impress everybody, including his colleague John Adams, who noted a great tendency at the Continental Congress for people to go on in long, windy speeches about everything. There were so many outstanding people there, all eager to show their education and their rhetorical gifts. Adams wrote to his wife, "The consequences of this is that business is drawn and spun out to an immeasurable length. I believe if it was moved and seconded that we should come to a resolution that 3 and 2 make 5, we should be entertained with logic and rhetoric, law, history, politics, and mathematics, and then we should pass the resolution unanimously." Actually, they were surprisingly unanimous in turning away some attempt at a compromise with England and firmly asserting what they considered to be their sacred rights as Englishmen. This did not win respect on the other side of the Atlantic. Samuel Johnson, Dr. Johnson, perhaps the most famous intellectual of the era, wrote an explosive pamphlet attacking the Americans. His pamphlet was called "Taxation, No Tyranny," in answer to the resolution and address of the American Congress, and he stated the government's case in extreme terms, saying, "We have always protected the Americans, we may therefore subject them to government. The members of Parliament have a perfect right to impose taxes on the American colonies as payments exacted by authority from part of the community for the benefit of the whole." Now, all of that was fine. That was sort of standard boilerplate British argument. But Johnson went further. He said if the Americans refused to cooperate, then the British should, quote, "give the Indians arms and teach them discipline and encourage them now and again to plunder a plantation." As if that weren't enough, he also suggested that black slaves be given arms by Parliament. Arming people to whom slave owners denied the freedom which they so loudly demand for themselves is an act which surely the lovers of liberty cannot but commend. Lovers of liberty, particularly in states like Virginia, colonies like Virginia, didn't appreciate the sentiment. Meanwhile, events proceeded toward an obvious climax.
So we'll stop it there, and we'll point out that events in the American colonies did proceed to an obvious climax, and we can see that the monarch back in England was being instructed by its Jesuit masters that it had absolute right to rule over all of its dominions and all of its human assets, and that's exactly what the colonists were. So in their revolt, the colonists became American citizens and rejected the notion that they were human property of the king and broke the bands of political tyranny and freed themselves. And today we enjoy these liberties and these constitutional freedoms and protections. And we can see how the aristocracy had already had it within their minds to set the sub-Saharan African population and the European population within America, and ultimately even the Indian populations against each other for their mutual destruction. So as we fight for freedom and we unite together in that freedom together in America in this American Revolution and become one people, we have done the unimaginable in the sight of the world and in the eyes of history. So I hope you guys have a great night. We'll talk again soon.